Good morning, folks. Welcome to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, your host. We're in luck because we're going to be speaking to Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz, our Extension Soil Fertility Specialist, on top dressing nitrogen. He's going to talk to us about very important topics to be thinking about when top dressing. So get your cup of coffee, come on back, and we'll get this show on the road.
Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Good morning, folks. Welcome to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, your host, and we're in luck because we're going to be speaking to Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. And Dr. Dorivar is our Soil Fertility Extension Specialist. And this time of year, Dorivar, we're thinking about top dressing nitrogen. So what are some things farmers have to think about in preparing for top dressing?
Yes, there are several key points that we need to take into account as we are getting ready for top dressing. One of those is obviously timing of that nitrogen application, but also what kind of rates are we going to be putting, the placement of that fertilizer, and the source of that fertilizer that we're going to be using. Those are probably perhaps some of the key points that we need to consider. One other thing that we may also think, depending on the situation, is what else we may be thinking in terms of nutrients. Are we going to put something else in addition to
boron,
nitrogen?
zinc, or sulfur?
Yes. So those are also some questions that we need to keep in mind.
Okay. So let's talk about the first two, the timing and the rate, because those kind of go together. You know, if you put all your nitrogen on in the fall, well, you don't have to worry about too much this winter and spring, so they kind of go together. So let's talk about those for a second.
Yes, they kind of go together, and obviously, again, ideally, when it comes to rates, you want to have a good soil sample already, a profile nitrogen sample in the fall that will give you an estimation of how much more nitrogen you may need to be putting this fall. So that will give you a good idea. But also the timing of that has implications in terms of how much you already put pre-plant and how much more you're going to need to be putting here as a top dressing application. We usually require some level of nitrogen at planting at least, and that's very important to keep in mind. Obviously, sure, top dressing could be one of the main nitrogen application times, but we still need to have some of that nitrogen applied at planting. So we are assuming you already have some of that nitrogen applied.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more, shift a little bit back more toward timing. At this point, any time on until when? When is the farmer going to get the biggest bang for the buck related to top dress nitrogen?
Yes, so there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind there. Obviously, we want to have that nitrogen early enough to make sure it's in the root zone when the uptake happens later this spring. So that will be a key component that we need to keep in mind. So we really need to be thinking about applying that fairly soon here, and for sure we don't want to be after joining, which is really kind of the latest you can be thinking about application.
Okay, so what happens if I run into a wet spell? I haven't put it on before joining, and there's a 2 or 3 week period there that I should have put it on, but I can't. Now it's dry and it's after joining. What do I do?
I think obviously still will be of value applying nitrogen at that point, but the risk at that stage is that you may not get the full benefit from that nitrogen application. You still have the risk also of that nitrogen not moving in the root zone.
Right.
So obviously we want to be looking at the conditions in the next few weeks, and if all possible, move forward with the application at this point.
Hang on, we got to take a word from our sponsors. So folks, grab your cup of coffee, come on back, and we'll talk to Dorivar some more.
Buying a car shouldn't be this hard. And at Brown Chevrolet Buick in Wamego, it isn't. It's actually awesome. Whether you want a new or used car or truck, Toby's team can make the deal. Even if you want to custom order a new car or truck, Toby's team can make the deal. See Toby's team at Brown Chevrolet Buick in Wamego. We're awesome.
Heinen Brothers, a fourth-generation Northeast Kansas farm family, knows how tough farming can be. Farmers helping farmers. Heinen Brothers Ag, selling and servicing crop protection products, fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, cover crops, quality aerial and ground application. Call today to learn about our extended term financing program. 800-760-4964. HeinenBrothersAg.com.
Ag Promo Source is a unique group of marketing specialists with one mission: help your ag business grow. Each affiliate has their own area of expertise, and they work together to bring you advice, products, and services. To get started, visit agpromosource.com. Ag Promo Source. Together we grow.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, and with us we have Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. And Dorivar, we were talking about timing and rate of top dressing just a second ago. Let's kind of continue that a little bit more. I was asking you a little bit at the end there about what happens if it's too wet and you have to go out past jointing. What happens if you have frozen ice, snow-covered fields out there?
Yeah, those are some of the challenges, and of course we want to avoid those conditions. If we have frozen ground or snow-covered conditions, we want to avoid putting nitrogen in that kind of a scenario, because we can have significant amount of runoff, and in some cases the nitrogen may not leave the field. However, that distribution is going to be affected significantly. So we want to look for some days where we don't have those conditions, ideally, for nitrogen application.
So let's talk about rate again. I know we're past the pre-plant time, we're thinking about top dressing, but what do we normally think about the distribution or the amount we apply in the fall versus what we apply in the springtime? I mean, is it 50-50 or 20-80, percent? What do we normally think about?
Yes, ideally I would like to see most of the nitrogen applied as a top dress, especially in soils that can have potential for nitrogen losses. Mm-hmm. Sandy soils, for example, could be a concern. So in that case, again, I would like to put just small amounts in the fall. Remember, we don't take a lot of nitrogen in the fall.
There's no roots,
there's no growth much. So you just need a little bit. A starter sometimes is enough, and then come back with the full with the most of the nitrogen application in the top dress time. Again, minimizing losses for some of those problematic soils in particular could be very important.
Okay, so we've talked about timing and rate a little bit. There's a formula for rate that we talked about, profile nitrogen being important. So can you tell me a little bit about that formula?
Yes, if we think about that formula, the key in that formula is really yield potential. So that's something that is very important. And again, I know many producers also like to do more of their application as a top dress for a reason, because it's pretty difficult to have a yield expectation in the fall when you don't know you're going to get the moisture, you don't know what's going to happen. And at this point, we'll hopefully have a better idea. We also kind of know what happens last year in terms of yield potential if we didn't get a profile nitrogen. If we have a failed crop, sometimes the probability of seeing more residual nitrogen is higher. Right. So we can take that into account also for when it comes to rates. In many cases last year we have some pretty good yields. Chances of seeing residual nitrogen in that kind of situation will be lower.
Right. There's been some soil profiles, in that south central Kansas that 60-80 pounds of nitrogen left over from the previous year. So that soil profile test is really important.
It's very important. Yes.
Okay. Dorivar, again, don't go away. We got to have we got to take a break here, folks. Come right back after these words from our sponsors.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
I'm a patient of Kansas Regenerative Medicine in Manhattan. I had stem cell therapy in my hips and my left knee. My wife and I both are patients. We went down there the same day in November. Since then, My hips are feeling a lot better. I can work now most of the day if I want to. And before, if I worked in the morning, I was done in the afternoon, or if I worked in the afternoon, I was sure enough done for the rest of the day.
Kansas Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture, represents grassroots agriculture. The state's largest and most powerful farm organization stands up for its members through leadership development, agriculture education, legal defense, environmental advocacy, farm safety, and risk management. Members also enjoy money-saving benefits. To join our organization today or to learn more, go to www.kfb.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
That's My Farm. It's brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer. With us we have Dr. Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. Dorivar didn't run off during that break, and we're happy for that. Dorivar, let's continue our conversation about top dressing nitrogen. We talked about timing and rate. Let's talk about source.
Yes, source obviously is another key component, and many producers obviously will choose the source of fertilizer based on convenience, how they are set up, how they usually do their programs. But prices.
Cost.
Yes, but also that's a key point. The cost is a big factor, and it's something that we need to be looking at, especially this year. The grain prices are not.
They're bad.
They are bad. So we need to be looking at that very closely. And in terms of source, typically for top dressing we can use dry urea fertilizer, UAN liquid obviously is a popular one. But actually, many producers that will do top dressing with anhydrous as well, which is something that is a possibility. We do have some research on that as well to evaluate that source.
Okay.
And again, one thing, a few considerations that we need to keep that in mind when you're choosing those different sources is what potential you have for efficiency, potential for losses for that nitrogen, again, as we're thinking about improving efficiency in general. Typically, if we are talking about broadcasting, for example, a liquid fertilizer, we can have some concerns in terms of tie-up.
On the residue, you're saying?
On the residue. If we have no till system
Sure.
tie-up, that could be a potential factor. So we need to be thinking about that, especially as we are talking about how we place that fertilizer as well. So in that case, for example, the use of dry urea fertilizer that can move through that residue and into the soil may be a better choice, maybe a better alternative compared to broadcast liquid fertilizer. Like I say, anhydrous application as well is something that we've been looking at, and like I say, many producers use it. Sometimes you do have some damage to the standing to the wheat.
Do you go with the row or across the row? How do you do that?
One thing that we've been doing is going in an angle, and that seems to work pretty well for us. We injecting the anhydrous in about 20 inches or so. That seems to be also a very good distance. If we go much further than that, 30 inches, we may start to see some waving later on and that sort of things. But about 20 inches seems to work pretty well. Going in an angle, we don't see a lot of damage to the wheat with very good results.
Well, you can't cover as much ground that way, can you? With anhydrous, because you're as opposed to a broadcast or using a liquid, it's much a slower process going.
Absolutely, and that's part of the decision that the producer needs to make. Of course, what's going to be more convenient in terms of the speed that they need, and again the availability of equipment as well.
And also whether they're putting on herbicide.
Yes, and that's another good choice, another good point, and again the reason why many people choose UAN, because again many people will be putting herbicide at that time as well as a carrier. So again, those are different factors that we need to be thinking about as we choose the right source.
Well, with UAN also you're probably going to get a little burn. That always shows up.
That's always show up. We obviously, depending on condition, if we have warmer temperature, a little bit of green in the leaves, then we start to see obviously more of a burn. But again, a lot of times that seems to be also more cosmetic at this point.
Sure.
We don't have usually still a lot of biomass to really cause a problem.
Okay, hang on here. Folks, stay right with us. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Soil is the life of a farm, and for 25 years, SureCrop Liquid Crop Nutrition has helped growers produce abundant quality crops while preserving and improving the soils they steward. SureCrop offers complete soil and plant analysis with cropping recommendations, delivery direct to your on-farm storage, and quality crop nutrition custom blended for your field. Choose SureCrop for the assurance of excellence for your soil. Call today or visit their website for more information.
Next time you see a beautiful field of corn, reach out and thank the farmers who work tirelessly to raise corn for livestock feed, renewable fuels, and exports to feed a growing world population. The farmers on the Kansas Corn Commission work for Kansas Corn with grower-funded checkoff dollars that support foreign and domestic market development, research, promotion, and education to expand opportunities for Kansas farmers. To learn more, visit kscorn.com.
Tallgrass Commodities offers producers bulk commodities at a reasonable price with reliable service throughout the whole Midwest. To find out more about Tallgrass Commodities, visit tallgrass.us or call 785-494-8484. That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer. Dorivar stayed with us again, and I appreciate that. Dorivar, we've talked about timing, rate, and source. The last one, of course, is location, placement. Okay, let's continue our conversation.
Yes, one thing that we also need to keep in mind when it comes to nitrogen application now is the place of that nitrogen, how we put in that. A lot of that is related to what we're just talking about, the source of fertilizer. Obviously, depending on what we are using, we have different options. If we're using anhydrous, obviously we are injecting that. That obviously tends to be a pretty efficient way of putting nitrogen. But then if we're talking about liquid, we have multiple options really. Very often we do broadcast application again with herbicide. That could be one alternative. Again, thinking about potential for losses and especially tie-up, we have heavy residue situation. We may really want to think about using streamer bars. Streaming that nitrogen it can definitely help us to minimize contact with the residue and minimize tie-up losses.
So that doesn't cause any kind of streaking through the field. What settings are those on? Are they on like 8 or 10 inches?
Yes, and there are different types of nozzles that we can use for that. And again, they are. But essentially, what we're trying to do is we basically try to concentrate. We basically try to stream that fertilizer and concentrate it, so we minimize contact with the residue. And again, we can look at different type of nozzles that basically do that. But again, that would be one alternative in terms of trying to minimize potential losses. In the case of dry urea, obviously we are typically going to be broadcasting that, and the advantage of dry urea is that again that usually also move through the residue and get into the soil, minimizing potential tie-up problems. One thing that we potential for losses at this point that may not necessarily be a concern, but many times we get this question is what about volatilization when you talk about urea, volatility, urea and UAN in particular. That's usually something that traditionally we say is not a big concern given these conditions, cold temperatures. But there could be some days that we can have higher temperatures and we can have some volatilization levels. So there's that possibility, and again, obviously placing the fertilizer, for example, using streamer bars, can also help to minimize that.
So a situation that would cause volatility losses would be what?
Situations that will contribute to that will usually be a good soil moisture combined with high temperature. And higher temperature, again, above 60, close to 70, that's where you start to see really volatilization happening. The other thing also is that we're ideally going to have some moisture, some type of moisture to move that nitrogen in the soil to minimize any potential losses.
Okay, so if it's laying up on top of on the surface, it hasn't gone into the soil solution yet, then it's subject to
volatilization if that's sitting there for a very long time and we have higher temperatures.
Right, but if it's worked in by snow or rain or what have you, then basically we're scot-free?
Yes, that's what we want, yes.
Okay, we got one more section to do. Folks, stay with us as well. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities, big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, your host, and with us we have Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. Dorivar, we've talked about top dressing nitrogen. What are some other nutrients that can be put in with that, or we should be thinking about this time of year?
Yes, typically we would like to look at the mobile nutrients, and a couple of nutrients that can be applied at this time, of course, are chloride and sulfur. For some of those soils in some regions that we are seeing benefit from these nutrients. In the case of chloride, is something that we see quite a bit, especially if we are in kind of the central part of the state,
right,
where we don't have a lot of history of potassium chloride application because we usually have enough potassium levels. So chloride is definitely beneficial in that case. We still need to look at the profile sample, not just nitrogen, but also chloride and sulfur.
Because both of those, chloride and sulfur, are mobile.
They are mobile, so we really need to look at that profile, 24 inches, ideally to have a good idea. But it works pretty well for chloride, so based on that information, we can decide whether we need to be putting some chloride also with the nitrogen this time of the year. In terms of rates for that, the maximum rate that we seen in our research is up to 20 pounds. That's all we need to put. We never really seen any more in response to more than 20 pounds. In terms of the type of chloride that we can use, pretty much all the sources are good. It could be liquid, it could be even potassium chloride dry fertilizer. That will be work well. Again, it's highly mobile, so once you put in the soil, will move into the soil pretty easily. The other nutrient, like I mentioned, is sulfur. And that's also something that we are seeing quite a bit show up in recent years in some parts of the state.
It looks kind of like nitrogen deficiency.
It looks like of a kind of nitrogen, and that's been one of the challenges actually, because sometimes we say, well, it looks like nitrogen, may put more nitrogen to it, but it actually end up being sulfur, and we've seen in some of that situation. Now, in the case of sulfur, we really the source can make a difference.
Really?
And we really need to be thinking about sulfate form of sulfur to apply, because that is a form that's going to be available immediately.
As opposed to elemental
As opposed to elemental sulfur, which is something that could be a good price. Usually it's a good one to in terms of price. However, you need more time for that to basically hydrolyze and become available to the crop.
Lastly here, what do you have in your hand and how can it be used?
Yes, this is another tool that we're using quite a bit in our research program in general, and many producers are using. It's basically a sensor. It's a handheld sensor. This is obviously you can get one that has more bells and whistles, but this is very simple that you can use. And basically what you're doing with this is you go over the canopy and take a reading, and it gives you an index, a value that is an indication of how green the plant is, how much biomass you have, and this is correlated very well to nitrogen content and potentially nitrogen recommendation. So we talked earlier about the importance of soil testing for nitrogen. This is one alternative to soil testing. If we don't have that information, we can do well if we use sensors.
But soil testing is very important, but this is another tool to use.
It's another tool to use that can help us to fine-tune nitrogen recommendation. Yes.
Dorivar, thank you again. Thank you as always for being on the show with us. Folks, thank you for being with us. And don't forget, next week about this same time, we're going to have another issue of That's My Farm. See you then.
Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com.